I think it's time to take this bike on a short section of single track. Since my attempt at a different route failed due to getting late in the day and weather, but here we have mosquitoes and flies to contend with. Here we go. I figured that a weekday would be a better time to run this trail, and I don't have to deal with other bike traffic because I don't want to run a really long loop. I'm probably just going to do an out and back, and that actually may be the only option that exists. There's a bunch of the trails back in here that are closed due to a fire. Not that the fire is anywhere near the trails, is just a preventive measure to keep people from getting too far back in the Tules if the fire did explode. So we're in first gear right now. It's kind of slow and technical with all these whoop-de-doos. The trail kind of needs to be reworked. Riding trail with whoop-de-doos is kind of a pain in the butt. Second gear, you know, it's working, but we got a little bit of an incline, so we need to go down to first. Big heavy bikes like this are not my first choice for riding trail. Ugh. Although I did ride my old DR-Z on this trail quite a few times, as well as a lot of other trails. Wow, this trail is getting beat to heck. Now here's one thing that I totally don't understand. About 4 years ago, this crap was piled here in the trail, so it ended up making a little bypass. I don't know if that was intentional to limit people's speed coming through here, or what the deal was, but that stuff was definitely piled up intentionally. Street gearing is not exactly a good choice for this either. Wow. I got kind of hung up on that loose block. I just didn't want to launch myself off the trail, so I kind of got skittish and stopped. Oh, wow, this trail seriously needs to have a little piece of mini excavator style equipment come in here and rework it. It is just getting hammered. If I had this bike geared for my typical trail gearing, 1447 like I used to have my old DR-Z gear to, I'd be in second gear right now. Generally speaking, the majority of the riding that I could do on trails, I would always be in second gear on my old DR-Z with 1447. Yeah, I'm gonna have to hit second, but see, second's just a little bit too high. But the fuel injected system is handling this with relative ease, and I don't have any sensation that the bike's gonna flame out. Yeah, wow. As beat up as this trail is, I don't know how far into it I'm gonna go. Wow, it's just destroyed. once we get further into it, hopefully it will smooth out a little bit. The problem is this trail gets a lot of use. Lots of log clearing had to be done this season. You know, I may not even make it past the second river crossing. Well, there's actually 3. Once is a bridge, then a shallow, wide crossing, and then a narrower crossing that's a little bit deeper. About 5 years ago, I went for a swim at the second water crossing, which would be the 3rd river crossing. It was not fun trying to dry out my old DR-Z. I'll have a link to that video down in the description below. I'll also include it in a little link above. So here's the bridge. I just kind of like to ease into it on a bigger, heavier bike. And then our next crossing is the one that's kind of narrow and sort of wide. And that one's usually never much of an issue. The issue I had on the other crossing, the second actual water crossing, is that I target fixated on a big rock on the far side, and I actually ended up hitting it square on. My bike came to a screeching halt and I tipped over. I got completely soaked, pretty much head to toe. I scrambled and picked the bike up as fast as I could. And then, of course, I tried to start it and immediately the engine was locked up. So it's like, oh, nope, she's got water in it. So I pushed it out of the creek or river and started to dry it out. It ended up being like a 3-hour process, which I mentioned in that video. I don't have my own video of taking a dunk. I've got a video from Andy's helmet cam. He was riding behind me and captured the whole thing. Probably about 20 years ago. I'll throw a photo up if I can find it. I came up here in the fall, and that was the last time that this trail had any maintenance done on it, like heavy maintenance. Actually, no, it wasn't 20. It was probably, I'm gonna say, I bet it was 2010. Fall of 2010, because I'm almost positive I had my truck camper that year and camped at a little out of the way camping spot with a bunch of friends, and we ended up finding this little mini excavator parked along the trail. All of the roots make this trail kind of a nuisance as well. Yeah, see, it's getting a little bit easier to ride now. But whoa, I smacked my toe on a rock. Some of these bricks are getting blown out off the trail bed. Last year I rode this trail on my KTM about a week earlier, probably about 2 weeks earlier than I'm riding it today. And I'll have a link down in the description below for that video as well. I actually made a nice long loop. It started out all trail, well, Forest Service road to get to the trailhead. And I shouldn't really say a trail loop, because I just rode this trail which connected to another trail and then continued on out to the end of that trail and then down into a little community where I had lunch and whatnot, and then took all roads back. Yeah, see, the big heavy dual sport bike, it's doable on single track, but it's a lot of work. And granted, I rode the heck out of my DR-350s, both of them, and then also my DR-Z on trails. I probably put my DR-Z through more trail usage than I did the two DR-350s. Because by the time I got the DR-Z, I had a RV, a toy hauler, so that gave me the capability of going out on trips and camping out and setting up a base camp and being able to do multiple days of riding, which included single track like this. I bought my first RV in 2003, and then the DR-Z in 2006. Ugh. This would be so much easier on my KTM 450. If the trails down here further ahead, it's like 6-7 miles into this trail, if those other trails weren't closed, I'd be more inclined to get up here earlier in the day and actually make a nice loop out of it, just to really put the DR-Z through its paces on some trail. But this is enough for me, for sure. There's about 3 different options once you get out here. You can do a loop that goes out by a couple of lakes. Actually, you can do 2 loops. One is a short one that bypasses the deep river crossing, and then another one goes out by 2 smaller lakes. Then there's another option, which is just out and back to a small lake. And then there's a couple of trails that shoot off to the right and drop down off the ridge. We've already went by one of them. And then there's another trail that drops down off to the left, back down to the main road. I don't think I've ever been down that one, but I have been up it a few times. If I ever wanted to do a loop and go back down to that road, that's the trail I would take. Further out, there's another trail that drops down off this system to the left, and I've done it a few times downhill. I've done it up at least once, and it is not an easy trail for somebody like myself on a big, heavy dual sport bike. I'm sure that I have probably done it on my KTM, but it is not fun, because the only thing about it that's not fun is you've got probably a mile that goes through a big rock garden, big, huge, jaggedy rocks. A scree field is what some people would call it. and it just absolutely beats you to death, and it is not fun. Every time I end up doing it, I remember, holy crap, I forgot how bad this was. I told myself the last time that I rode it I wasn't going to ride it again, and then I forget. Well, now I actually remember that. And by the time you get through all of this to that and maybe do another loop, you're kind of wore out to begin with. But you know, I'm still in first gear. I've got the ABS off. I've got gravel traction control mode on. I don't have any issues with the fueling or any snappiness in ride mode C. It's totally tame. And that's probably the best thing for riding technical single track, is you don't want something too terribly snappy. At least that's my theory. Yeah, it's totally doable. My legs are getting a workout though. Trying to stand up a little bit. So that's just a little camp area. It looks like a trail goes off, but it doesn't. It just dead ends. I made that mistake once. I always used to mistake that for this trail junction up here. A bunch of the signage has been rebuilt, which is kind of nice. So this trail is one that bypasses the second water crossing, the nasty one. I took this trail last year and got about a mile and a half into it and couldn't go any further on my KTM because there was a tree down across the trail. So I came back out, and then see, I almost flamed out the bike right there going over that hump. Anyway, so I came back out, rode this out, went through the first water crossing, got to the second water crossing, and saw a Forest Service work crew on the other side, and talked to them for just a bit, and then looked at the water crossing a little bit, and they ended up offering to ride my bike across. I had already told them that I was the guy that went swimming, and they had seen my video, so they knew of that incident. In fact, I think I had talked to them a few days before down at their camp. So two of them offered to ride it because they said they had been through it 10 plus times, going back and forth to their work party or work locations. And I said, yeah, if you guys are okay with it, I'm okay with it. So they did. One of them did anyway. This trail is amazingly dry for this time of year. It's just been unbelievably hot and dry up here in Washington this year, this spring and early summer. I'm pretty sure that this trail system opened up earlier than it typically does. The Forest Service redesigned their website, and their trail status page is kind of non-existent. So I don't know for sure when the trail actually opened. But the last 2 years it's opened up right at the end of June. And 2 years ago, which is when I was dying to get up here and ride this ASAP early in the season, I couldn't ride because About 5 weeks prior, I broke my left wrist doing a dual sport event down in Northern California, so I was sidelined all summer. I didn't get back out on the bike until like mid-September time frame. I probably could have gotten out sooner. I just didn't want to risk any further issue. So this is the first crossing, and I guess that trail, I've gotten these water crossings mixed up. It's the first one that is deep and sketchy. And you come down at an angle, so you can't like get totally lined up to make a flailing crossing through it. So the second water crossing, you come down a side hill off on the other side of the river. Sometimes I'd call it a creek, sometimes it's a river. It's named blah 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 river. But anyway, then you cross it at an angle, and there's actually a couple of rocks in the middle of it where you can put your feet on if it's really deep and sketchy and you have issues. This one does not, at least today, it does not look as deep as it was last year when I was up here in early July, or the time that I went for a swim in it. And some of the rocks have been rearranged. So those two big rocks, to the left of them was another big rock, and that is not there anymore. So that's a deep spot right there. And then over here where the water's kind of fast moving, just the side of that big rock, that is a deep hole. If there weren't all those big rocks forming a little mini dam, this would drain better and not be quite as deep. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to risk crossing it. I don't need to have issues today. You can see a lot of people have been riding through it because this is all wet, and this is getting blown out a lot since I was up here the last time. So that loop trail at that last junction, that bypasses this water crossing. So yeah, I don't even recall what my starting mileage was. I looked at it, but I don't remember now what it was. Anyway, we're going to get this bike turned around and carry on and head back to the trailhead. Got her turned around. There is one other complaint I have about this new DR-Z is the spot that you can grab hold of the subframe above the muffler on the right side of the bike. It's not as easy and secure of a location to get your hand in there and grab the subframe and pick up the bike into the bike to hoist it. It works, but you end up flexing some of the body work back there, and there's some edges that are not exactly conducive to easy holding on to. Like there's maybe some sharp edges or square tubing or something back there. And then kind of leaning the bike into my hip and thigh on the left side as I hoist it, some of the plastic bodywork depresses there and pops and changes position or whatever it does. Ugh. If I was up here in the middle of the day on a weekend where there was other bike traffic and riding with somebody, I would maybe be tempted to go through that water crossing, but chances are I'd probably just opt to go around the loop trail up to that other little lake, which in this direction. That lake is off to the right. I would do it today, but there's nothing to gain by doing it other than just to say I did it. And there's a couple of sharp switchbacks on that trail. They're not terribly steep. Well, one of them it's really sharp, and it goes right around a tree at the apex of the turn. And I know that those switchbacks are going to be completely blown out and loose like the rest of this trail is. So that's another reason why I'm thinking there's just no reason for me to do that. Especially riding here solo with a bike that has a street-oriented tire on it. I was really hoping that I could this year make that big pass-through trail run through this area that I did on my KTM last year. Andy has never done that with me. He was the one that got me on helmet cam taking a swim in that creek. Prior to last year, I think the previous time I did it would have been 2015, when me and a friend from a high school I used to work at rode it. And it's very possible that that is a loop or a section of trail that we did on the Lake Wenatchee Dual Sport well over 25 years ago. Back then, the event was relatively small. The first handful of years that I did it, the biggest it ever got was about 80 riders, and that was towards the year 2000. But prior to that, the first time I did it, it was more like about 45 riders. And it wasn't an issue sending a handful of people down a single track section of trail. The Forest Service was okay with issuing a permit for that. But the event was small, and not everybody rode the trail section. Just like nowadays, where the route is split up into A and B, advanced and more beginner friendly stuff. That's how it was back then. Yeah, we're still in first gear, and first gear is pretty much the gear of choice due to my street sprocket gearing here. I would, first gear would be a little bit more usable at the top end if I still had the 43 tooth rear sprocket, but in the grand scheme of things, you want a lower gearing on trails. Hence the reason I had 1447 back in the day. So you hear me talk a lot about that 1447. Well, where that sprocket set derives from that's what the dirt model of the DR-Z had, is 1447. There was 3 versions of the original DR-Z back then. You had the kick model, which was kickstart only. That was just called the DR-Z400. Then you had the DR-Z400E, which was an off-road model, but it had electric start. And then you have the DR-Z400S. So the kick-only model and the electric start dirt model, a lot of people will call that model just the dirt model DR-Z, but that term is interchangeable with the kicker model, but a lot of people refer to the kick-only model as the kicker model. At least that's the nomenclature and the models that were available in the US back in the beginning. So the two dirt models had 1447 gearing, and then the S model had 1544. And then when the SM came out in the mid 2000s or whenever it did, it was 1541. So the new DR-Z4S, they've changed up the sprocket set just a bit and put a 1543 on the S model. I think the SM still has 1541. So right at the point in time where the DR-Z4S was announced, I found a bunch of the Suzuki marketing photos and promotional photos that showed a lot of information about the bike. I scanned closely all of those photos, just looking at them very close, and I picked up the fact that the new S model had 1543, or at least a 43 tooth rear sprocket. And at that point, the specs didn't show that. They just didn't list the sprocket sizes. The other thing they didn't list is the gear ratio. And when I finally got my service manual, I had to have been the first person to buy one. I saw that the transmission gear ratios were identical on the 4S compared to the 4S or 400S. A lot of people misinterpreted that information in Suzuki's marketing material where they said the transmission has changed. Well, all that meant was that a lot of the gears had been like made out of different steel or alloy or whatever to reduce friction and maybe make them more durable. So a lot of people misinterpreted that phrase of the transmission gearing has changed, or the gears have changed. It's actually what it said is the gears have changed. It didn't say the gearing. I keep getting sidetracked. So they misinterpreted that phrase to conclude that the gear ratios changed. And I don't know how many times I've come across people that start talking about the 4S and 4SM online and think that the gear ratio changed, and it didn't. They also saw a cutaway photo or image, electronic image, of the engine, and it specifically stated in that image that all of the new, or all of the parts that have been changed are indicated in yellow, and that transmission gears, whoa, okay, that's the first time I flamed out in nearly 1,200 miles of riding the bike. Well, flamed out due to my own stuff issues. I target fixated on that log that was off to the left and got paranoid about it. Oh wow, so where was I? So the image showed a whole bunch of yellow parts, and the description of the image said all of these yellow parts are new or redesigned. So a lot of people interpreted that to mean that the gear ratios changed as well. And as soon as I got my DR-Z, I cracked open the owner's manual, and it showed the same thing that the service manual did, is that the gear ratios did not change between the old and the new. So that's enough rambling about that. It's mind-boggling in the back of my head to know that I used to ride big heavy dual sport bikes on single track all the time. not every time I would go out riding, but it was primarily when I would get together with friends and we would organize a big, we called them camping rides. We'd set up base camp somewhere, just like I've done this past week and weekend, and then we'd ride for multiple days. At one point in time, there was about 8 of us that had DR-Z400s. And out of all of those people, I'm the only one left with one. I do still ride with 2 of those friends because they still ride. None of the other guys ride anymore. Well, I should say 2 of those guys still ride, but they are primarily doing street bike stuff. One of them has a daughter, and they he transitioned to riding quads as far as his off-road stuff, just so that he would have a family activity to partake in as far as motorized recreation. I think he still has his DR-Z, but he would definitely be the only one that still has a DR-Z. And 2 years ago, another friend, the one that I still ride with, he finally offloaded his DR-Z when his wife gave him permission to upgrade to a different bike. So he bought a KTM 350 XCF, which is a very good choice for a smaller CC, lighter weight dual sport bike that is also trail friendly. But you know, he has only ridden this trail system once, and that was with me in holy crap 2015. I'm bouncing off all these dang rocks. Ugh. There is a trail there, but that looks like one heck of a nasty trail. It was hardly a trail at all. It looked like a goat path or a wildlife path. It was super skinny. Wow, yuck. I'm pretty sure I've never been up that. And I don't actually get together with and ride with him that much after I moved to the east side of Washington. He still lives on the west side of the state, and he does a lot of riding with his kids now. Whoa! Yeah. There's where having ABS not disabled would have saved me. This is going to be easier to go down. These little rubber strips that you see poking up out of the trail bed, they are rubber strips that are embedded in a piece of lumber, like maybe a 2x4, and they're erosion control bars. That's historically how Washington forests have fixed up their trails to mitigate erosion on hill sections. It just directs the water off of the trail so that the trail bed doesn't get obliterated and turn into a big trough. And here we have a little water trough and a culvert underneath. There's a water trough on the right side of the trail. I think we were at like 56 miles when I turned around. Well, at least I've gotten some trail riding out of my system on the new DR-Z. That was my end game plan today. And it was sort of a last minute idea as I got to the spot where this trailhead is. The trailhead it's off the beaten path from the main road, and I kind of wanted to go down to the lower trailhead. There's two trailheads, the upper and the lower. I just wanted to see how deep the water was at the upper end of the lower trailhead. Because the first thing you have to do when you start out on that trail is cross the same river. And I've seen it a raging torrent in June. Anyway, when I looked at it, I thought, oh, that's not bad. I would totally go across that if I had time and was earlier in the day and had somebody riding with me. But that trail, crap, it's got multiple issues. There's one or maybe more bridges that burned, and the signage at the trailhead says that the trail is closed 4 miles in due to a washout. So whether it's really a washout or the bridge being out is the result of the closure, I don't know. It literally has been 20 years ago that I last rode that trail. And I've only ridden that trail from the top down twice. The last time, I'm pretty sure it was 2005. And prior to that, it would have been maybe 2 or 3 years sooner. It's been 2 different friends that I've ridden it with. The second time was Andy, and the first time was a friend named Jeff who had a DR-350 back then. That's what I was riding both times I rode the trail. So one thing I specifically remember about riding the trail the second time is that you get down probably the last mile, and the trail follows this river, and there's places where the river in high water has come up over the trail, so it's kind of washed out, so to speak, and you're kind of beating your way through a bunch of rocks. And I hit a big round river rock with my shift lever and completely folded that sucker over at a 90-degree angle. I don't remember if I didn't have a spare shift lever or what. I always used to carry one just for that, the fear of that happening, but I must not have had it with me, because me and Andy took the shift lever off, and I remember banging the heck out of it on a rock with another rock, trying to fold it back to the point where I could use it. Yeah, it's sad that people have built a bypass around that gate. I mean, a bypass for hikers is one thing, but that was big enough where you could ride a motorcycle around it. And this trail is closed from about October through typically mid-July, or when it melts out and has been deemed fit for use as well as cleared. So back that direction, this is an old sketchy road down below us. That's the route to the upper end of the lower trail. So this trail is called the upper trail and then the lower trail. So I was just on the upper trail. So, in conclusion, Is the DR-Z rideable on single track? Yes, it definitely is, if you don't mind wrestling with a big heavy bike. And more appropriate gearing would definitely be, well, more appropriate. Oh, I tried to downshift into first. I'm already in first, dummy. Wow, I worked up a sweat on that. I really need to open up some vents. It was completely crazy that I have been wearing my jacket all day. We're just about down to the bottom. So post your thoughts on DR-Z as a trail riding bike. And if that's what you do with your DR-Z4S or 400S, if you have owned a DR-Z400, I'd be curious to know how long you owned it and what year it was, and if you bought it new or used. I bought mine used. It was 4 years old with 875 miles on it when I bought it. And riding gear. Let's engage in some chat about riding gear too. Curious what riding gear you like and what works best for you for the type of riding you do with your DR-Z4S or 4SM, or if you've got a different dual sport bike or an adventure bike. Let's talk. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video. Over and out.